Let's look at how to do basic photo editing inside of Adobe Lightroom. This Adobe Lightroom is not the same as Adobe Lightroom Classic. This is a more intuitive, easy to learn version, as well as it can be used on desktop, on tablet, and on mobile devices. In addition to that, when you edit files, they will sync up to your Adobe Creative Cloud account. And that way you can actually take the picture on your phone. You can even start to edit on your phone. And when you're finished, you can actually open it up on your desktop computer and it will already be there and you can finish your edits there. So you can move back and forth between different devices as well, which is very nice. So let's look at the workspace to start with, and then we'll go through a couple of different edits of some photos. And so here we are currently in view of this one image. Down here on the bottom you can see there's also different views. This will show you all of the photos in a specific album, and then you can also show them at different sizes. Right? You can also kind of sort them by when they were taken or when they're brought into the program, file name, your rating, different things like that as well. Up here on the top you see this icon of photos. This will also give you some different options that you can look at. So the first one is to add a photo, and we'll look at that in just a moment. The second one is this Learn button. If you click on that, it's actually going to open up some different tutorials that you can go through that are built into the program, some of which will actually walk you through step by step how to do a project. So it will give you an end result, and then it will give you the beginning photograph and show you the buttons and the different techniques and settings to change, so that you can actually come up with that exact same photo. And there are different topics, right, that you can search through, different subjects, all those kind of things here. And that's something that's nice. It can kind of help you learn more about Lightroom. You can actually go to Discover and see different people's submitted photos and things like that as well. You then have all of your photos that are inside of what you've created right here. You can sort those. You can look at all your photos. You can go by the ones you've recently added, different kind of filters. And then down here on the bottom, you have different albums and folders you can create. So the plus button will let you create a folder. And once you've created that folder, you can then add different albums inside of it. So for example, I can go ahead and click on this. I can create an album this time. And if the image that's currently on screen, you can actually add that to the folder. I'm not going to do that, but you can see that adds a new album. You can actually add albums into folders by dragging and dropping, and you could have multiple albums inside of a folder, and you can organize them that way. I'm going to go right ahead and delete this folder and the albums inside of it because there's nothing there that I need. So I have created a summer conference folder. I've got some different landscape pictures and things inside of it to look at. If I go ahead and click on that, once again, it's going to take me to that single picture view, but I could also go in and look at my square grid and see more of them. To add a photo, I'm just going to click up here on the top and go to Add Photos, and I can go find something, and I can review it for import. And if you have multiple images, it's going to show all of those images here. It looks like I previously added this one, and so we'll go ahead and cancel that. But you can continue adding images that way as well. So once you've done that, you can go ahead and select an image to open it to edit. Now I'm going to show you the before and after a few of these. So for example, right here, let's go ahead and if we look at this, right, here's an after image. And then if we go look at this, here is the before, right? Drastic difference, and this is something that was done inside of Lightroom. This particular image was a raw image, right? It was shot on a DSLR, and a raw image basically means it captured all of the data that came to the sensor on the camera, whereas normally if you save as like a JPEG, it's compressing it, it's getting rid of some of that image data, so you don't have as much to edit. So in this case, I had more control over it because this image does not look good, it's overexposed, and because it's raw data, I was able to salvage the image. There are some other photos in there as well, right? Here's a before, looks pretty good. a little bit dark. The colors need a little extra. And here's an after, right? Had some fun with the colors and things. And then here is an after, right? And let me show you before, because I don't have one yet. So here's something you could do. In an album, you can actually right click and you can duplicate a photo. While that's happening, you'll notice up here it's backing it up currently, since I did that, to my Creative Cloud account. So it's syncing those photos with my account as we speak. And so once that's finished, we'll then be able to go in and I can reset all of those sliders and things to make it the original, so we can then go back through the process of how to create that edit. So it looks like it's now finished. So I can actually double click on this thing. I can then go to photo and I can reset the edit on that, right? So if we go back in and look, so we go back in here and look. Here on the bottom, there are some different views to show you the before and after, right? This will show you the original. That's before, that's after, right? And just with a few sliders, a few clicks here and there, we can drastically improve an image. And this is probably an easier way than having to duplicate all your images to show those things. So once again, we'll look here and we'll look at the before and then the after, right? There's some other things on screen as well, right? Your options for how far you're zoomed in are here. You can also give your photos ratings that you can then sort them by later down here on the bottom. Okay, and if maybe you're working with a client, you can use those. In addition to that, you've got this film strip, which will show all of the different photos that are currently in that album or folder. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off momentarily. We have got our comments that you can leave on those things. You've got tags, so you can add tags and different things to photos to sort them by. And you've also got information as well. Okay. In addition to that, up on top, you've got filters. So if you've got a lot of images, you can filter them, like I said, by rating, by type of image, by the camera you actually shot them on, different things like that. And you can even search. So if we go up here to the top and we search for park or something like that, it pulls up an image of a park. So it's fairly smart, and it will look for images that way as well. And so last couple things to point out, you can see that syncing again. We've got a help button with some different tutorials. We've got activity, and finally we've got sharing, which is where it will allow you to export your images once you're finished. You can get links to them. You can send them to people and different things like that. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start editing our images. Let me make sure we're on the right one. So we're going to go ahead to this CR2, this original image, and we're going to see what we can do to get this to look a little bit better. So over here on the right side, we've got different sets of tools we can use to improve the image. Okay, we've got our editing, we've got crop and rotate, the healing brush, the linear gradient, and the radial gradient. Plus, you've got some other options. You can show the histogram, send it to Photoshop, different things like that. So let's go ahead and start here in editing. Okay. Right off the bat, if you want to try it, right, you could hit black and white, or you could hit auto, and that alone helps quite a bit. Okay, we'll leave that alone for now. You got different profiles of color you can add to it. As I hover over them, you can see the changes that they make to the image. So we'll leave that where it's at. We can then go into these different sections. So let's start with the light section. You've got your exposure, which is your overall amount of light going into the image. So you can bring that down, which this one definitely needs. There's too much. It's very overexposed. You've got contrast, how dark your darks are, how light your lights are. If I pull this down, you see it gets kind of faded. If I pull to the top, it really, really pops a lot. So you can use that. And honestly, as I tell my students, if you don't know what these things do and they don't make sense to you, just slide them until it looks good, right? And you'll kind of get an idea of what each category does as you experiment. I'm going to go ahead now, a little contrast. Highlights, right? You can see I'm kind of blown out in the whites here. I'm going to actually pull that down, bring a little bit of detail back into the whites. You got your shadows. If they're too dark, you can bring some detail back that way. Right, you can adjust the whites and the blacks as well. So, I mean, just very, very quick sliding, and you can see if we click the eyeball, right, there's the before, there's the after. Just that alone makes the image look much, much better. Okay, and then as we move down, we've got the point curve. So this is all of the color and the light in the image, right? If I put a couple points into this, this is the brighter, the light areas, and then you've got your dark areas. So you could add a simple S curve and create some, some contrast in your image. You go from something like that to that. It looks all right. And you can also adjust each color individually if you want to do that as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and close up that section. There's our before and there's our after. It's already looking better. The next section is the color section, right? So you've got your white balance. You could try auto once again. Right, and that adds a little bit of warmth to it. I'm gonna leave it. You could also, if you get a spot in your image that's like a neutral gray or a white, you can take your eyedropper and you can just click on that and it'll try to match the white balance up for you, type of thing. Right, and as you can see, that didn't really work out. But you can do it manually. So you get your temperature slider here, cool to warm, so you can cool it down, you can warm it up. You can double click on it to reset it. I actually think this image needs a little bit more warmth, so I'm gonna add just a little bit back in. You can change the tint, add greens to magentas, and then you've got vibrance and saturation. So let me talk about these for just a minute. They do a very similar thing. They're both going to intensify the color or else take the color away. So for example, if I take the saturation all the way up, whoops, it's going to really intensify the color. If I pull it all the way down, it's going to make the color black and white. Vibrance does a very similar thing, but it protects skin tones, so it doesn't have as strong of an effect on like the reds and oranges. So if somebody's face or something, their skin is in the shot, you might want to use vibrance to protect their skin tones so they don't look unnatural. So for example, if I pull the vibrance all the way up, you can see what it does. If I pull it all the way down, notice everything goes black and white, but you can still see a little bit of color in the wood here, and especially in the cone, because it's protecting those skin tones. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and add, a good amount of saturation back to this image. And just from doing that, you can see, right, there's the before, there's the after. Got a lot more color in it. It's looking better. If you want to go beyond that, right, you've got your color mixer, which is pretty fantastic. You can adjust the color, the hue, the saturation, the luminance, right? So like the let's open that up. Where did we go? Oh, right there. Let me get to hue. So if we want to change the hue, and you're like, okay, I want to change, these greens to something maybe a little bit different. You go to your green slider for the hue, and you can change the greens, and you can see the greens are maybe slightly changing. I don't see them changing too much. There we go. I'm on the wrong slider. Right, you can see the greens are going a little more yellow here, or they're going a little more deep green here. So you can change them that way. You get your saturation slider, which does something similar. So watch those same greens. Okay, they're going to get a little more intense, or I'm pulling the color out of them. And then you've got your luminance, which is how bright they are, how dark they are. So now they get lighter, they get darker, and you can change any of those as you want. If you can't identify where a color is in these sliders, you can actually use this target adjustment tool. Here's how it works. So maybe I think that, I don't know, let's see. Maybe we do want to work with these green tones here. I want to actually change the color or the hue of them. So I'm going to go to hue. I'm going to take that target adjustment tool, and I'm going to simply click right here on these greens, click and drag. And you can see as I go left, the color is kind of going more reddish. As I go right, it's getting more green, as you can see here. So I'm going to find a spot I like, make that a little more green. And you can see it's actually adjusting two sliders at once. That looks good. I'm going to do the same thing for the leaves. I want to change the color of the leaves a little bit. Click on those. Add a little more red into them. A little more color variety in the shot here. And you can do that as many places as you want. Let's try the wood color up here. Make that a little more red toned as well. And you can do the same thing with saturation. right, this cone is a little bit too orange for me. I'm going to make that not stand out quite so much, but that's going to affect all the other colors in the image as well. So we'll look at how to maybe get rid of that cone later. But that's looking pretty good. All right, and you can change any of those like that. Your next section is your color grading, right? You can change the color tone of the highlights, the midtones, or the shadows if you want to get like an interesting, teal and magenta look or whatever, but you can change all of those things with those sliders. So we'll close that section down. Next section is the effects section. So you can add texture to an image. Let me just show you what that does. If I crank that up, you can see it gets kind of a little more gritty, a little more intense, type of grainy. If I pull that down, it gets more hazy and dreamy. It loses some of that texture. Clarity does something similar. So you pull that up, take that down. Right, dehaze, you pull some haze out of there. I think it's pretty good that way. So in fact, let's add a little bit of clarity. Let's add a little bit of texture. Just a little bit, add a little bit more pop to it. You can add a vignette as well. And that's basically those white or black edges that kind of draw the viewer's eye to the middle of the image. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that down just a little bit, just a tiny bit of a darkened edge. And let me just intensify that for a minute. So you can change the midpoint, like how quickly it changes, how round it is. You can change the feather, make it more gradual, things like that. Right, so you can see the before and after on that. It's kind of just drawing the viewer's eye to the middle. That looks pretty good. Right, and you've also, you got lots of different things you can adjust your grain, all these things. Okay, so that's effects. And then let's go into detail next. Right, you can sharpen an image, which I typically don't do, but if it's very, very soft, you could do that and sharpen it. If you got some noise in your image, you can reduce that noise with the slider. Here, there's not really much noise in this, but you can do that with your details. Inside of optics, removing chromatic aberrations, right? You can see some definition there. Color fringing, you can kind of remove that if it exists. And then you can also enable lens corrections. So you can see here in this image in particular, it knows that I shot this on a 24mm 2.8 automatically, right? And so it knows how to calibrate or change that lens to make it work better, right? It takes the distortion or the fisheye out of that lens. Okay, and I like that better, but it's taken some of my work out, so I might have to go back and fix that. So I'm going to leave that on. And then you've got geometry, so maybe you need to change the distortion yourself and all those kind of things you can work with. I'm going to go back into effects. In fact, I'm going to go back into light. Now that we've I would typically go and enable the lens corrections at the beginning and then adjust after that, but I did not, so I'm going to have to tweak a couple of things in here. I'm going to go ahead and put a little darker vignette back on the edge, and for now we'll call that good. Okay, so if we go ahead and look at this, right, here's the before, looks pretty terrible, and here's the after. It looks quite a bit better, and there's a lot more we could do to that image, but there it is, right? And that isn't just the basic section in the editing. Now let's move on to the next section. Here in crop and rotate, like not a lot of options, pretty simple. You can choose an aspect ratio if you'd like, right? But you can, if your image is not straight, right, you can adjust it till you think it's straight, which in my case, if you double click, right, mine is not straight. You can see this was not shot straight. So you can actually change this. So let's just change that so the lines are much closer to straight. Right about there, it looks straight. You hit enter. It's going to crop it down for you. Now the lines in the image are all straight. Okay, so let's go back in. You can rotate your image. You can flip it upside down, backwards, mirror it, things like that. So that all exists here in the crop and rotate section. And then let's go into the healing section. So you have got a clone stamp here. We've got the healing brush though, which is actually really helpful. So I'm going to actually take another spot and try to copy over it. Now I only picked the one spot, so that's not going to help yet. So let's go ahead and undo. So if I actually click and drag over top of this cone, and I really don't want that cone, so it's going to let me pick another spot to try to patch it with, as you can see as I move this around. So if I'm like, pick the ground, something that looks similar, maybe like right there, and we'll call that good, and hit enter, and voila, we have got rid of the cone, right? And you can feather that, so if you select it again, you can feather the selection, kind of make it blend a little bit more. You can change the opacity and things like that if you need to. But I think that looks pretty good. Can't tell that there was a cone there. We'll call that great. So that's how you can heal areas or copy areas completely to another area with the clone stamp. You can also reset it with this button here. Next, you've got your brush tool. And this allows you to add all those same adjustments that we did on the original image, but just to a specific location, if that makes sense. So maybe we want to work with just this tree, for example, right? And you can change your brush size and how feather it, which means the intensity of your effects kind of gradually fades away as it gets to the edge of the brush, the flow, the density, stuff like that. But basically, I'm going to go ahead and do something like that. I'm going to take this tree and I'm going to start to paint this tree, something like that. Okay, and then as I go ahead and tweak that, you can see, right? And here, there we go. Let's go ahead and paint this a little bit more. It looks like I missed some spots, right? You can see that looks pretty terrible, but you can see it's only affecting that tree. So maybe now, if I'm like, oh, you know what, the exposure needs to be a little brighter on that tree to bring it out, maybe more of a focal point. Let's increase the contrast, things like that. Maybe we want to go find the saturation. You know, we could adjust the saturation on that tree, pull the color down, add more to it, things like that. You know, you can even change some, other things about it as well. But basically, the brush is allowing you to just work with a specific area in your image, right? And you can select that, and you can see exactly where that is. And then finally, you have got, well, you got two more. You've got the linear gradient, right? So instead of just a specific area, you can drag a gradient across. Let me show what I mean. So if I click and drag this down, the image, it's going to change. It's a linear gradient. It's gradually going to change from like full effect down to zero effect. So let's go ahead and overexpose this. Let's blow this out so you can see. So the top of the image has 100% full effect on the exposure change, and that gradually moves down to 0%. Right? And you can adjust that. If I pull that down, you'll see it happens longer or shorter, but that's only happening 100% here, 0% here. It gradually changes. So maybe, the sky is too bright. We could go in and we could change the highlights, pull the highlights down so the sky is a little bit darker, things like that, and just work with that one piece of the sky. A radial gradient is very similar, right? Maybe we want to work with, I don't know, just this patch of ground right here. Take that, remove it, and that's only going to work with that area instead of the entire image. So we can, warm those leaves up a little bit right in that area. And if you want, you can stretch it out and have it, take more of an effect. But that is a radial gradient. So you've got a lot of control over your image, and you can pretty much get it to look like whatever you want. So here's the before, and here is the after, right? Much, much better looking. And when we finished, as mentioned before, you can go ahead right here and share it, and you can, maybe save it out as a JPEG or something like that, and it'll let you decide where you want to save it, what you want to name it. Let's go ahead and look at another image or two. So if we go back to, in fact, let's go ahead and show the film strip. Let's try, let's go ahead and open this image back up. So I'm going to go ahead and start from the beginning. All right, so let's look at this image, and we'll go ahead and start editing this. It's a pretty flat image. There's not a lot in it. Nothing really standing out too much. I mean, this is the obvious focal point, but it's hard to tell. So we're going to maybe make the sky look a little more dark and ominous. We'll also add, more light to the hoop, make it more of a focal point, and different things like that. So let's first just go into the basic adjustments here inside of light. So we can actually start with auto, see how that does. Did a pretty good job. Maybe next, we're going to go ahead and make the hoop a bit brighter. So I'm going to come in here and grab the radial gradient, Let me go ahead and click on this. See if I can get this hoop to look a bit brighter. So we're going to turn up the exposure on this a little bit. Just the whites. Just trying to overexpose the rim a little bit, which I don't want to do exactly, but that looks good. Maybe we'll add a little texture to this thing, a little clarity. That looks good. Okay, so here's the before and after, right? Before, after. It's looking a little bit better. Maybe now we'll take like this linear gradient. And I'm going to take this, I'm going to pull this down a ways and get just the sky. And then we're going to pull down the exposure on the sky. Kind of get it a little bit more moody. Maybe we'll add a little bit of texture to it. You know, adjust the shadows, adjust the blacks a little bit, and that's starting to look a little bit better. You want to take the exposure down even a little more. I like it. It's looking good so far. So next, maybe this rim is a little bit overexposed. So maybe next we will come in here to the editing, and we'll come down to the color mixer section, and I'm going to come in here to luminance. Take my target adjustment tool. I'm going to click on that rim, see if I can't get that to be a little bit darker, and then maybe I want to change the color of it slightly. Let's go to hue, do the exact same thing to look a little more red versus it's looking kind of orange. Yeah, that's a good spot. So something like that. I still want the top of this to be a little bit brighter, so I can go back into my gradient here. I can click on that radial gradient and I can actually adjust it. I'm going to move it up just a little bit. Something like that. I think that looks pretty good. And then if I go back into my linear gradient, right, you can see the parts of this that are being adjusted. So maybe we pull that down just a little bit as well. It looks pretty good. This area in the middle, well, let's go ahead and add a inside of here. Let's go in and add a vignette. Okay, I'm going to put some dark edges on that to still keep drawing the eye to the middle. So it looks a lot better. And then the only thing I want to do last is there's a lot of color right here in the wood that's kind of detracting from the focal point. So maybe we take our brush tool and I go ahead and increase the size of that just a little bit. And just so I can see where I'm painting right now, I'm going to just go ahead and take the exposure down a bit. And as I start to paint through the image right here, you can see that it's actually pulling down the exposure. It's making that wood just a little bit darker. In fact, I want to go even darker than that. Right, and that makes sure that the basket, the hoop, is the focal point of the image, and then we can end up with something, you know, it looks a lot better. Okay, something like that. And then finally, let's go ahead and look at this image of the beach. Image looks good. Could just use a bit more color. So let's come in here, and we'll start once again in the edit section. And I'm going to go ahead and hit auto just to see what happens. Right, it looks okay. Not a huge change, so I'm actually going to go back. But you can adjust the exposure as needed. So I'm going to adjust a little bit, get a little bit more light. It's starting to overexpose here in the highlights, so I'm going to pull the highlights down just a little bit. Bring some of that back in. And I think overall that looks pretty good. I'm going to try to adjust my curves here and see what happens with this. Just a little bit. Maybe in the shadows, I'm going to bring a little bit of detail back in to the shadows. That looks pretty good. Next, we're going to come down here to the color balance, add a little bit more warmth to that, add more to those reds. That looks great. Now, vibrance and saturation will probably do a lot here. So remember, vibrance is going to not affect those warm tones as much, like the skin tone colors. And let's see what we got just from those few things. I think it's an improvement. Then we can come down and we can have some fun with the hue. So maybe we want to change some colors in this. So I'm going to go ahead and take my target adjustment and pick a color, maybe this pink in the sky, And you can see that's going to completely change that. So I'm going to actually make that a lot more red toned. Looks good. Maybe we change the saturation, those yellows just a little bit, make them brighter, maybe in the purpley red tones as well. That looks pretty good. Over here we've got a little bit of blue, a little bit of aqua in the sky, and maybe that needs to be turned up as well. So let's adjust those blues, right? Get those a little more intense. Let's go ahead and turn them up here as well. All right, so you can see there's kind of the two contrasting colors now. We got this reddish color here, we got this bluish color here. It's looking pretty good. Increase the saturation, that should intensify it even a little bit more. And now we've got this much more vibrant looking sunset. That looks pretty good. And then maybe just as a finishing touch, we add a slight vignette again, draw the eye to the center of the frame, and there's a lot more we could do, but we'll call that good for now. And so once again, when you're finished, you can export with this button, send out your finished product, and the entire time you're working, it is backing up and syncing to the cloud. And that is how you edit photos in Adobe Lightroom. Next, let's quickly look at how you would edit on a tablet or a mobile device.